Welcome to another great episode on E Pluribus America, another mini cultural series all about politics. And we are once again speaking with incredible author and veteran political analyst, Bradford Kane. He's written a great book called Pitchfork Populism, 10 Political Forces That shaped an election and continue to change America. It's a great book. It's funny. It's anecdotal in some points because you've been in the game for a long time. And I want to thank you again for meeting me and for speaking with me here on E Pluribus America. Welcome and thank you so much, Bradford Kane.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. Pleasure to be with you again.
Thank you. Well, a lot has changed. The last time we spoke, we were nearing the election. Obviously, we were all a little nervous about the outcome of the election. And here we are. It's 2021, February, and we've experienced some turmoil. Nothing that I would personally expect, but we've seen some serious changes. Talk about pitchfork. That's basically what happened. I mean, I believe maybe some people did bring pitchforks to the Capitol, but let's talk about your thoughts on the election outcome, what followed afterwards, and where do we go from here?
I was not surprised, but of course it was, it doesn't happen until it's happened. So, and of course, everyone had to do all the right things in order to get us to the right place. It is discouraging that so many people still voted for the ex-president after all of the things that he'd done and after all the his tendencies that he exhibited, which are really many of the worst instincts of the American psyche and the American history. So that part was unfortunate, but on the beautiful side of it, it was very clear that there was a very strong, obvious, pronounced victory for President Biden.
And a historical selection of Vice President Kamala Harris, the first woman vice president, first South Asian and Black woman to be in this position. So what are your thoughts on that?
The Biden-Harris administration really embodies what America is in 2021, 2020 and 2021. It was very encouraging in that way because as I wrote about, one of the principal driving forces in America today are demographics. Racial and ethnic history, of course, is embedded in American history. It's part and parcel. To be able to have the first woman, the first African-American woman, the first South Asian woman in one of the two top positions speaks volumes about our demographic transition. As mentioned, the U.S. Census Bureau anticipates that in 2042, we'll reach parity between white and non-white populations in the country. And what Donald Trump had been trying to do is turn the clock back. It basically disenfranchise an enormous share of the population, both by his policies and then his statements, and then, of course, what he did after the election, questioning the vote, raising completely spurious, nonsensical arguments that 60 courts threw out, including a lot of Trump-appointed judges, threw out as being completely lacking any basis. But he was trying to basically focus on certain cities that have larger percentages of people of color than the population as a whole. It is no coincidence that he was focusing on Atlanta and Detroit and Philadelphia. It's reprehensible. But once again, the beauty of the Biden-Harris administration is it combines many of the best of forces. Joe Biden is a beacon of the institutions of America that make America wonderful. Once again, of course, embodied in our Declaration and in our Constitution and all the amendments, and not perfect, but always in order to form a more perfect union. And of course, there were some major flaws that we all know very well in the original documents, yet the spirit of the original documents, which was to try to create a climate of both liberty and equality and opportunity for everyone. That is something that's embedded in our institutions, which Joe Biden, having been a senator for 36 years, vice president for 8, he was the embodiment of all that. And then Kamala Harris is the embodiment of the new generation, the new reality of America, where all people can have a seat at the table, where all people can, where there is no ceiling, where,
Right.
you know, it used to be that there was talk, but people felt frustrated. She shows that with concerted effort, diligent persistence, and of course, the acumen and the training and the skill sets and everything else that go with it, she got to be vice president. And it just sends a magnificent message between the Biden side of the message and the Harris side of the message that brings it all together and is very encouraging for the United States going forward.
It was, I have to admit, it was very encouraging. As a Black woman, I shed a tear. I couldn't believe it. It was a win for me too. I felt the glory in that, just simply being who I am, being in my skin. So it certainly gave me hope. It certainly gave me hope. And yet, go ahead.
Along those lines, it makes me think of the youngest generations of Americans for whom that is normal. Yeah. Many people grew up seeing President Barack Obama. Now many young people are growing up seeing Vice President Kamala Harris. Yeah. And what that tells people, whether it's that they want to go to college and they want to become an engineer, or that they want to enter politics, whatever, but it sends a magnificent message going forward toward which the country as a whole can aspire.
Absolutely. And yet, in this moment of progress, of human progress, political progress, a nation's progress, we have an outgoing president who was inciting violence in the midst of all the good that we're all seeing. Finally, after 4 years of a very tumultuous administration. So, what are your thoughts on former President Trump's behavior in this transition of power?
Well, first of all, he accomplished his goals on many levels. First of all, he loves to distinguish himself. Well, he did distinguish himself as the worst president of the United States in our history, and with the most reprehensible act and actions of any president in American history. So maybe if that's what he was after, then that's what he did. What it means on a much broader level is that Donald Trump was not kind of sui generis. He didn't just come out of nowhere and change everything. He tapped into certain forces that have been subterranean in America. He legitimized them. He gave them license to come out and feel as if their reprehensible views that we had, for the most part, moved on from, as if those views were actually okay. So what he did in this run-up to January 6th, once again, it's racist, it's anti-democratic, it's authoritarian. It goes against the core fabric of American democracy. Keep in mind, in the 1770s, one of the most common themes was tyranny. Mm-hmm. Tyranny, George III. And what Donald Trump was trying to do was establish tyranny in his favor. So the troubling part about January 6th is that although Donald Trump instigated it, he incited the riot. He didn't do it alone. In other words, he had all those people storm the Capitol. Of course, Donald Trump was in his comfy chair back home, watching it all and not doing anything about it, getting all the phone calls, as we'll be hearing during the impeachment trial in the Senate, getting all the phone calls from both Democrats and Republicans saying help. And he, very well known now, it's been very well reported, did nothing. The reported words were that he was borderline enthusiastic about all the tragedy that was happening. So the troubling part, the aftermath here that we're going to continue to deal with, is that these forces have come out of the closet, so to speak, and they embody things that are contrary to the fabric of America and are more fitting for 1830s than the 2020s. So the challenge will be, and President Biden and Vice President Harris have their hands full with this, because it's not something that gets taken care of in a month. It's not just FBI and DOJ doing investigations and prosecutions. It's a changing of the culture. It's a question of making people feel like, oh, hold it, we went too far. That's not appropriate. That has no place in America. I believe that most people, we see these numbers of how many people bought into the big lie. As I've said before, one of the things that Donald Trump did was manipulate the minds of the malleable. And there are certain reasons why they were particularly susceptible to his message. But now the whole thing is, how do we reverse that? Bit by bit, we'll never get 100%, seeing things clearly, but that'll keep on being whittled down. The trial in the Senate will expose a lot. That'll wake some people up. Also, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, through their actions, the $1.9 trillion COVID package, but getting COVID health, COVID economy, racial equity, climate change, and immigration, their first 5 priorities. By addressing these kind of things, people are going to start to realize, hold it, knowing what you're doing does matter, and actually caring about the country does matter. Empathy together with expertise is a wonderful combination. And as people start to realize that their lives are getting better, that many more people who had been misled are going to realize that they were misled, and they're going to see the value of having genuine leadership that knows what it's doing and cares about the people that they're leading.
Yeah. And although they have been successful in this COVID relief bill, they were unsuccessful in getting agreement on the $15 minimum wage increase. What are your thoughts on this particular agenda? Because when we talk about caring about the public, that's a huge part of it.
Joe Biden's slogan of Build Back Better, okay, it's a little catchy. The people who like alliteration are probably especially fond of it. It sends a magnificent message. It's not trying to roll the clock back to 2016. It's trying to say, yeah, we got to get back on our feet and make our country whole again, except we got to do it in a way that solves the problems that were existing then as well. So the idea, the key word there is, well, actually all the words are key, but the word better. Mm-hmm. The idea of, if you just turn the clock back, well, then you still have institutionalized racial inequity. So while we're doing these things, while we're establishing the road forward and laying a new pathway for the economy and for people's lives to be able to be more fulfilled and fulfilling, the idea is, what do we need to do to create the opportunity, the equity, the harmonious culture and society? That's a bit of a lofty goal, but nothing wrong with having goals. And so the idea is, don't just turn the clock back. Let's actually aim for the America that our aspirations are tailored toward. And that gets into, well, how, the economy. When you talk about the $15 minimum wage, I mean, go back to the late 1800s, before labor unions, when there was, complete abuse, and then all the progressive era with Teddy Roosevelt and everyone, so many different important players, but then embodied by FDR's agenda and so on and so forth, LBJ and onward. The whole notion is always trying to create better quality of life for people. $15 minimum wage would be part of that. Some people have raised issues as to whether or not there's both substantive and technical reasons that people have taken issue. One is that if you do it in the context of the budget reconciliation, there's a question about whether or not you're allowed to have that be in there, because is it outside the definition of what a budget reconciliation could be used for? So that's a technical thing. And then substantively, there are some senators of some states that say our economy is not the same as your economy. The cost of living in West Virginia and North Dakota is not the same as it is in New York and California. These are points that will continue to be dealt with. And I do believe that the important thing is that President Biden's objective of a living wage be recognized. And so whether it's done in this context in exactly that way, there's someone else, there was another senator who suggested something about indexing, raising the minimum wage. I'm not exactly sure what number he had in mind, but then index it both according to inflation and regional economies. There are a lot of ideas that are being floated out there, but the key objective here is a fair living wage for all people so that they can be able to pursue their own version of the American dream.
There are analysts that are saying that he's going to have a tough time getting his agenda through. So even though the Democrats are in charge of all three branches, so why is there still this sentiment that he's still facing an uphill battle?
One of the main reasons why people are making that association right off the bat is because few times in American history has a president come into office with such a mess lying in front of him. Obviously, FDR, given what was going on in the years since, I guess, October of 1929, that developed into the Depression when he took office, that was a crisis point. And then, of course, in his case, he had another crisis even larger later. But when he came into office, he had that crisis that was impacting every American. And obviously, even bigger than that was when Abe Lincoln came in, and President Buchanan said something like, "If you're as happy to come into the office as I am as happy to leave the office, then you're a very happy man." So it was like these rare moments when there have been incredible challenges. Joe Biden is facing that level of a challenge. There are only a few examples like those where a president comes in facing that much of a challenge. So the idea of associating with FDR is the idea that he has got an enormous mandate, he's got an enormous challenge, he has got a lot to do and a lot of room for creativity to do it too, because there's no template, there's no cookie cutter answer. How do you deal with a situation like this? This is basically unprecedented. The idea of, like what we went through last year, normally, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and the American people love to do that. Here we were told, don't, stay home. That's contrary to our national temperament. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of, what President Biden is dealing with in this unusual way. I believe he's going to be given a lot of latitude because there is no district, no state, no district in America that is not impacted by what's going on, and everyone knows it. That said, razor thin margins, 50+1 in the Senate over 50, with the vote from Vice President Harris, leaves no room for no margin of error. And in the House, the margin is very slender. So it is going to be, the idea of you got to do big things, and like President Biden often says, the risk is not doing too much. The risk would be if you did too little and we didn't solve the problem, and the problem got worse and it became protracted in time and in depth. So he's quite right about that. But those razor thin margins are tough. But the great thing about it being Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House, Joe Biden, 36 years in the Senate, and then 8 years as vice president, that man knows how to negotiate. He knows how to talk to his members, and not just his members, but he's got a good relationship with Mitch McConnell even, and he knows a lot of the Republicans. He knows how things work in DC far better than probably anyone. So the idea of his first meeting in the White House with legislators, was with Republican leadership in the Senate. Sent quite a message saying that, we're not going to agree on everything, but I'm going to listen to you. I care what you have to say. I want you to come along. Tell me what you think. Maybe you point out some good things. We'll make some little fine-tune adjustments here and there. But he still wants to go big, and he will go big. And I do believe he's going to get some support on the other side of the aisle.
Why are Democrats still facing this criticism that they're simply not strong enough and not really listening to the American people, but rather social media culture and the whole cancel culture, and it seems like they're still facing some criticism about how they're going to handle this power that they now have.
This is another one of those dichotomies that's deeply rooted in American culture, society, political history. It relates to chapter 1 of my book, when I talk about our national split personality, our national identity being a split personality. And I talk in terms of the rugged individualist versus the communal collectivist, and describing what some of those impulses are that lead this side to this and that side to that. Among the many extensions, and you can look at it in many ways in terms of isolationist versus globalist, internationalist, and labor and business. Well, one of those also is the dichotomy between the Democrats and the Republicans. Communal collectivism has embedded in it, kind of in its DNA, a broader circle of caring. I talk about it in terms of concentric circles. And it's empathy. And like we saw a complete lack of empathy for 4 years under this former person who was living in our White House. And in contrast with that, Joe Biden is a deeply empathetic person. He is the embodiment of that. The empathy extends to what you care about and wanting to be able to be unified and harmonious, and as Abraham Lincoln said, with malice toward none and charity toward all. That is central to the ethos of the collectivists who want all of the rising tide to lift all boats. That gets into that difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats inherently would like to be able to have a country that works together with all people together at the table, being able to Joe Biden's been talking about unity. Unity is a lot of what that's about. He also distinguishes it from bipartisan, because you can have unity without having bipartisanship, although it's nice to have both. So in answer to your question, I think there is, first of all, an inherent predilection for Democrats to be able to want to work together with the other side. We know also that solutions are more sustainable when there's buy-in from the other side. When you can do something where it is achieved by people from both parties, then there's less of a likelihood that the next time the power flips to the other side, that they're going to want to pull it up by the roots.
Right.
So there is a very practical reason to be able to work with the other side. But here's the thing. Even though President Biden wants unity, and he knows how to talk with Republicans and listen to them, and he cares about how things affect them too, he also knows what LBJ did. He's a student of history and a student of the Senate and of the presidency. LBJ was a product of the Senate, but then when he came into the presidency, he worked together with people across the aisle and all that, but certain times he would lay down the gauntlet and say, this is how it is. And I believe that Joe Biden will never give up seeking unity and a collaborative, cooperative interchange with people, always with mutual respect and dignity for all. But he'll also know when to draw the line and when to get tough. And that's an art, not a science. And there's no one more equipped to know how to use that paintbrush than Joe Biden.
but will it make a difference as we move forward? The Republicans aren't going to lay down and let the Democrats, run into the future, hogging all the glory of this country. They're not going to do that. So analysts are also predicting that politics for them will now become a very technical thing. And you mentioned the technicality of it all. What are your thoughts on politics becoming technical?
Well, actually, I have a slightly different view with regard to the makeup of who is in Congress and who's running the government. What we saw on June 6th, even after the insurrection, even after sedition, we saw most Republican, the overwhelming number of Republicans that voted along the lines of the former president's complete deception and nonsense. It's not just lawyers. It's people. There are teachers, there are doctors, there's all kinds of. There's a pilot. There's former military people. There's a broad range of people there, and that vote showed that a lot of them don't know anything about American history or American government and American law, because if they did, then that January 6th episode would never have gotten any participation from members of Congress. So the idea, in some cases, they are lawyers and they decided to put aside their legal knowledge in favor of these other despicable forces. But back to your question, I do believe there's a combination of, there is a certain amount of expertise. And a lot of that also is because of the democratization of the process, which I also discuss, of course, in that with the technology tools of today, there's that increases opportunity for everyone to be involved. And as I kind of look at it since the 1960s, especially, the process has been ramping up where more new groups get involved in the political discourse. And as more groups get involved, and then you add new tools and new technology where you can stratify people and you can talk to one group without talking to another group, that's where you get into that technical element. And please keep in mind also, we're coming into now with 2021, with the census of last year, we're going to have redistricting, which means there will be a new round of gerrymandering. And when you talk technical, there's nothing more technical than carving up the districts. And there are experts in every state on both sides of the aisle who make a living doing that. So it is a question of, yes, there is an element of the technical, of the pragmatic, of people using the toolkits that they have. However, that's not the whole picture. Fortunately, a lot of Americans don't know about that, don't care about that. And even the ones who do know about it, still, I believe that American values and principles are the more powerful driver. And so the question is, if the leaders who can appeal to the core values and principles and identify with that on a personal level with each individual voter watching things from whatever corner of the country they're in, when they hear things that resonate with them, that matters.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The impeachment managers have invited the former president to testify under oath. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think he will accept? Do you think it's something he should do? If you are on his side, would you advise him to do that, or would you advise him not to do that? What are your thoughts?
I thought that was fascinating. It wraps together both the political and the legal into one, which I guess impeachment proceeding is a combination of legal and political and constitutional. The thing is, Donald Trump had exhibited some signs where it looked like he was feeling like he had floated, I don't know if directly or through some of his surrogates, the notion that he wanted to come to the floor of the Senate and tell it like it is. This was, a few weeks ago at least, and there was like, oh my God, we don't want this turned into a circus.
Right.
Well, then I think there was the notion that if he is not given the opportunity to say what he wants to say, to speak his mind, then if there is a conviction, he may say, oh, it was a kangaroo court because they weren't willing to listen to anything I said. They wouldn't even let me talk about it. This very smart move by the House impeachment managers clipped that wing. They basically gave him the opportunity to speak in his own defense so that he cannot later claim that he was not heard and had no opportunity. Having done it in the way they did it, which of course was by a letter with a request, it wasn't a subpoena, it was a letter with a request. The interesting thing is it's being interpreted in a number of ways, and this is open for debate. But some say that because his attorneys responded on the merits while he chose not to testify, that their discussion of the merits are not germane to the proceeding, because Donald Trump chose to say, no, I'm not going to come and talk. And then if at trial in the Senate, if his attorneys do bring up certain factual things about, well, Donald Trump said this and what he really meant was that, and here's what he was thinking, that could be inadmissible because he was given the opportunity to speak directly and he chose not to. So that forecloses those issues from being part of the proceeding. And then there's another school of thought that even says that the fact that he chose not to testify either directly in the Senate, on the Senate floor, or in some other way, the key thing, by the way, is under oath. Under oath.
Right.
There was going to be no compromise on that, because otherwise you're just doing your Twitter kind of stuff. But if he were to testify under oath, either there on the floor of the Senate or somewhere else, some say that the fact that he chose not to participate means that all facts are presumed to the contrary of his interests because he chose not to defend them. So these are a number of things that it gets into a number of the legal interpretations, and there's precedent for arguments on both sides. But it is a very consequential thing that they did, and the ramifications are unclear.
Could they subpoena him? Can they force him to testify under oath?
They could issue a subpoena. Probably won't happen. Probably not a good idea, because that is something that he would litigate. It would get caught up in courts. It would delay the whole process for quite a while. And it's an interesting argument, because it's pretty clear you can't subpoena a sitting president while they're serving as president, but you can for an ex-president. So here's the thing, is that he was impeached when he was president. So now they're trying to make the argument that he can't be convicted because he's no longer president. But if they say, no, you can't bring a subpoena because he's president, well, then you're contradicting yourself. So,
so they do that all the time. They do it all the time.
The contradictions happen all the time, except that when there is a standard of law, then contradictions are not as welcomed. If it were in a court of law, then there would be a judge with a gavel that would make it very clear which one. It's not as clear here in this case, but still, you're right. It is a little convoluted. There's a little wiggle room.
What responsibility do you think Trump bears in the Capitol riots, and also which part of that responsibility do other Republican leaders like Mitch McConnell, also carry, as far as really setting the stage for this insurrection to happen? I mean, 5 people were killed, and two police officers have committed suicide. This is really, I think, shaken a lot of people's idea of the sacredness of Congress. So, what responsibility is shared across the board, from the president all the way down to his party members?
There's a very important legal principle involved here, which is not just for lawyers, but it's for every American, because every American, understands this element of courts.
Mm,
Proximate cause.
mm,
It would not have happened but for what the president did. But for the president lying about the outcome of the election, none of this would have happened.
mm.
But for the president going on Twitter saying that it's a sham, there's fraud, that it's a hoax, all the garbage that he said, but for all that, January 6th wouldn't have happened in the way that it did. But for his statements after December 14th, saying, come to the Capitol on June 6th, it's going to be wild. Wild. That's his word.
Mm-hmm.
But for that, the January 6th insurrection, sedition would not have happened. You can go through a long line of things. You can see what his mens rea, his intent, what his mindset was when he picked up the phone and he was calling the Georgia election officials,
Right.
both the Secretary of State and some other people, trying to get them to find votes for him. All
So
that
was
shows.
Lindsey Graham.
I'm sorry.
So was Senator Lindsey Graham.
Exactly. Exactly. So I would say, in answer to your question, and it's great that you brought in Lindsey Graham, because it's not just Lindsey Graham. Even over on the House side, there are the people like Andy Biggs and Paul Gosar and all of them who were basically playing along. And I have a feeling that a lot of them were doing it disingenuously. A lot of them know better. A lot of them know that that was a complete garbage thing, but they wanted their autocracy. So who knows which ones knew better and which ones didn't. And Josh Hawley apparently had been thought of as being, he went to good schools and all that, but it's very interesting that the senior statesman of Missouri Republican politics, former Senator John Danforth, said that supporting Josh Hawley was the worst mistake he made in his life. So, these kind of things tell you each of these people that you and I have named bear responsibility, but no one bears as much responsibility as Donald Trump, because without him doing what he did at each step of the way and urging other people to do what they did, none of that would have happened on January 6th.
Why don't they bear equal responsibility, if not even more? Because we all know what type of person Trump is. I mean, Trump is a wild card. He's a badly behaved human being. He's he's made it for. We all know the type of person he is. So why were the adults in the room not corralling this this runaway bull that destroyed the China cabinet?
It's a fascinating point, because on the one hand, there is the question of relative responsibility. Whose actions were the most egregious?
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, if Donald Trump was committing a crime, then all the people who were complicit in it were conspirators. So when there's, like, in the concept of conspiracy, which, once again, the whole notion of Donald Trump won the election, that was a conspiracy theory. And the fact that there was election fraud, massive fraud, that was a conspiracy theory. And who were the conspirators? So you can look at it either way. In the case of Mitch McConnell, it's interesting. He nuanced his words. He's very skilled. Senator McConnell nuanced his words differently than some other people did. And we were all hoping, come on, please say what is the truth. Mm-hmm. And he didn't say what we were hoping he would say. And we know that part of that was because he was very focused on the two Senate seats in Georgia, for which there was a runoff. And we understood his political calculation, but still is like, come on, right. That Joe Biden is our next president. I think he was even acknowledging it behind the scenes. So it is troubling. The interesting thing is that once the Georgia Senate runoff happened, Senator McConnell came to the floor on the 6th and gave a very statesmanlike speech, talking about that was rooted in truth of the election and all that. We just wish we heard that about a month and a half earlier.
Right, which again plays into that whole the whole technical stepping, maneuvering that to me, it looks like they're all doing. They could have done something much sooner. But again, they're also, I believe, afraid of what the president could do to them on Twitter before he got his Twitter account suspended. That was a huge weapon.
Also, the whole thing that we saw for 4 years in terms of, why did the Republic? If you go back to 2015, we remember Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz and others were making comments about Donald Trump that were incredibly disparaging, and suddenly they came around. Huh?
They were being honest.
Honest and brutal in their assessments. And then what we saw was a complete flip. And I've opined in my book that a lot of this was kind of pragmatic. They wanted the goodies. They wanted tax relief. They wanted judges on the Supreme Court and elsewhere. Maybe third on some deregulation. Mm-hmm. But those are the goodies. And so they were going to support him to get the goodies. But then what seemed to happen, you brought up Twitter, and there's the whole media ecosphere beyond Twitter. Mm-hmm. It was suddenly it shifted. And then they became worried because they saw that he had an incredible grip on, once again, manipulating the minds of the malleable, where Donald Trump had a grip on X number of votes in their district or in their state. And they felt that they didn't want to take a chance of alienating those voters for their own electoral purposes and such. So that's part of the tragedy of what happened over the past 4 years. Mm-hmm. Instead of principle and values, constitutional history, the things that we know to be the United States of America and what defines us as a nation, as a people, unfortunately, they were basically shuttled to the side by certain people so that they could get certain things that they want and maintain their seats. It's something that I'm sure, the same way that we still talk about the election of 1824, they'll be talking about the election of 2020, 200 years from now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia lost her committee assignments.
Well, first of all, when we talk about unprecedented, that some is, some isn't. What year was it? Just a couple of years ago, Steve King of Iowa, who was making all kinds of racist and just kind of and anti-Semitic and just kind of crazy comments, he had his committees removed from him by his own caucus. And we've seen it other times even in recent years, in recent decades, that some members have been censored or reprimanded, and at least in one case that I remember, was actually removed from being a member of Congress. So it can happen. The unusual part about this is that Kevin McCarthy, Congressman, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, did not take the same actions with regard to this person as he did a couple of years earlier. And that was disconcerting because there is no room whatsoever in American government for a government official threatening the life of another government official, or anyone for that matter. But especially the notion of a member of Congress making threatening statements of threatening violence to other government officials, completely off the rails, unacceptable. And he should have absolutely done the right thing, but he didn't. And he didn't leave Congress a choice because he wasn't willing to take the actions on his own. It's unfortunate, and this is all kind of the echoes of what we experienced over the past 4 years that hopefully will, it's kind of like it doesn't automatically go away, but hopefully it'll just kind of like have a smaller resonance and hopefully become diminished over time.
She literally harassed and chased a victim of a school shooting, David Hogg, who became an activist, an adult chasing somebody who's been traumatized, who lost friends, in a school shooting. What are your thoughts on the responsibility of voters
people started digging more and they started finding more videos. It's unfortunate that her constituents hadn't done that ahead of time. And when she was on the floor making her speech before the vote the other day, completely outrageous that she said, I never said these things while I was a candidate. That is called a lie, because there are videos of her saying exactly things about the things she said she didn't talk about, and they're dated. There are dates on videos. And it is, I could be nice and call it a misstatement or an untruth, but it's a lie. And that means on the floor of the House of Representatives, in defense of herself, trying to save herself, that was what she resorted to. That's not becoming of a member of Congress, to put it mildly. Going forward, the interesting thing that ties in with that is in my book, in each chapter, I end each chapter with implications for the post-Trump era. Mm-hmm. And at one particular point, I talk in terms of presidential candidates should be obligated to undergo certain basic review, certain basic elements of scrutiny. There could be like a group of, I call them Brahmin, to use a term for greatly esteemed wise people, or senior statespersons or something like that, who would pose certain basic questions to see if they understand the basics of American government, the basics of the Constitution, the basics of what it means to be charged with the public trust. Mm-hmm. So in that same way, I hadn't seen this congressperson coming. I hadn't anticipated that. But that same set of guidelines that a presidential candidate as a floor, and that doesn't get into, what's your policy position on this or that. We can have all kinds of discussions about people's policy positions. But if you don't understand what the public trust is, if you don't understand what the Constitution says, what your job would be as president or as a member of Congress, then what are you doing? There is a lot of room for mutual respect, for recognizing each person's dignity, whether you're a member of Congress or any of 330 million Americans, really. But there are also some things that are beyond the pale. The idea of, once again, the congresswoman that you were asking about before, Marjorie Taylor Greene, mm-hmm. threatening violence against people, completely unacceptable. The idea of bringing firearms onto the House floor, which is the temple of democracy, is unacceptable. But certain things are just not okay. Violence, not okay.
But what does the future hold? What does the future hold for this country in the post-Trump era? Have we shaken this guy? Have we shaken this syndrome? Or is there more to come? More of Trumpism to come? Has he unearthed a group of people like the Greens, like the Cawthorn, or all these radical members that are making their way to Congress, and they're QAnon conspiracists and think all these, insane things about their own government? What does the future hold?
Well, that brings everything together, of course, and that's kind of a part of the ethos of my book, of course, and that's why I discuss the post-Trump era in each chapter, because ultimately Donald Trump became the embodiment of all those of subterranean forces, many of which are just completely unacceptable. The racism, misogyny, the ethnocentrism, xenophobia, authoritarian, autocratic inclinations. Those things are unacceptable. And then he also brought in some other things which are legitimate points of debate in America in terms of, with trade and globalization. You can make arguments for whether we should have, different provisions of trade agreements. So you have a trade agreement, you include a provision for this or a provision for that. There are some things which are active, ongoing debates. Mm-hmm. But with regard to those forces that are the real problematic ones, he pulled that together, and as I was saying before, he legitimized certain people who previously knew that they should just keep their mouths shut and stay out of view. And suddenly he welcomed them all to come forward, and he called them special, and he called them beautiful, and he
People.
he loves them and all that kind of stuff. So the difficulty is Donald Trump, he did the damage that he did. And if you look at this impeachment conviction and other things that he may have to, other consequences for his time that will, let's just say, make it very unlikely that he will have a prominent direct voice. Your question is, what about the force that he mobilized? What about the things that he set in motion that are people all around the country, maybe only 5 people here, 3 people there, 2 people there, but added together, and it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Percentage-wise, it's not, but still they are a vocal minority that can be very problematic. So going back to what we were talking about earlier also, just because you voted for Donald Trump doesn't mean you fit in that category. People vote for different reasons. There are some people, and you know, for some people, there's the notion, well, if you voted for Trump after everything you saw over the last 4 years, then you're complicit in his actions. But we all know there are some people that, because of their family heritage, for whatever reason, my parents voted for Republicans, their parents voted for Republicans, their parents, and it's just an automatic reflex thing. So you can't say that all people did this, voted for Trump for the same reason. That actually gives me hope, because as President Biden and Vice President Harris solve problems, address the COVID health issue and the COVID economy and racial equity and the climate crisis and immigration and many other things that need attention, more and more people are going to wake up and realize we prefer a meritocracy over a kakistocracy, which is the opposite of the meritocracy, having the worst people in control. We prefer a meritocracy where skilled, talented, knowledgeable people who care are leading the government, are running the government, are making things happen. Bit by bit, I think you're going to see more and more of the people who maybe had either not voted or had voted on the other side or whatever. You're going to see more people start to support the notion of calm, efficient, professional problem solving. And I think that bodes well, but it doesn't happen overnight. So it's not just by FBI and DOJ doing prosecutions of the people on January 6th. It's not as simple as that. It's going to be an ongoing process where trust will be established over a period of time, showing that President Biden, Vice President Harris care. They're doing the right things. They got the right people in place. They're moving the country forward for a more prosperous, successful future that is inclusive of everyone, with basically opportunity for everyone, diversity and inclusion, being able to allow everyone to be part of the picture and let everyone pursue their American dream in the way that they see fit.
So you're optimistic?
I am, but it takes time. Not overnight optimistic. This is not, we're not going to get to March 1st and suddenly the little sparrows are going to be chirping. It will take time. There may be incremental progress as the results of the COVID relief bill and the racial equity initiatives and the reforms of the Defense Department and having our economy, our economy too, but our environment be elevated to the importance that it all has as our own, sustaining body, that without which we're toast. So as these things happen and are put in place, and people realize that this leadership team actually cares and is doing the right things, bit by bit, bite by bite, few people by few people, community by community, more people will start to realize, and there will be a tamping down of some of the aggression, and more gravitation toward unity, but it takes time and effort.
Right. In the words of the great James Baldwin, how much time do you need for your progress?
I love that question. It makes me think of Brown versus Board of Education, with all deliberate speed, which for some reason some people thought meant, oh, good, they're going to move it fast. No, with all deliberate speed meant take your time, progress some other day. So I'm totally on board with that sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
It is not as though it's being deferred. You're not seeing Biden-Harris administration put things on the back burner. They're not. But from the time that you do, first of all, certain things were taken down day one with executive orders. That part's great. You have to reverse certain things. But then the policy team, they're developing policy. That gets translated into legislation. It's got to work its way through Congress. And then it's got to take root in society. So some of the things, the thing is, you don't want to be the bottleneck. You do not want to be the bottleneck for change. But once you do what you can do, meaning Congress can do a lot, President can do a lot, Congress can do a lot, we have to bring on the American people too. We have to enfranchise Americans to reach out, maybe into areas that were beyond their comfort zones. One of the beautiful things about 2020 is that a lot of white people started recognizing their white privilege. Mm-hmm. They were never confronted with it before. And suddenly, tragic events made them realize that they were so accustomed to their white privilege that they didn't even know that they had it. And then you see people having their epiphanies where, oh my gosh, you're right. Mm-hmm. I want to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. I mean, it makes me think of this during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. I remember an amazing, there was a town I think it was in Western Texas, mm-hmm. that I think had something like a town of like 3,000 people, and about 700 of them turned out for this demonstration. When I saw it on television, I only saw white people, and they were all holding up Black Lives Matter signs. When you have that kind of progress, when there is that kind of an awakening, when people start to realize that how this thing affects my neighbor also affects me, and my principles as an American are involved, that spurs unity. That opens people's hearts and willingness to be able to talk and to work together and create solutions and put some of those other forces in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's been really inspiring to see such a diverse group of people come out in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. I've seen, Asian Americans come out and speak up and say, Asians are supporting Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, it's been inspiring to see that the young people that are coming out. So. We've had a wonderful conversation. I could talk to you all day about politics, but is there anything I haven't asked you that you think is important to note as we talk about culture and politics in America in the post-Trump era?
I'm delighted that now that President Biden and Vice President Harris are in the White House, that the NBA champions are going to come to the White House to be able to celebrate their championship again.
What do you think they're going to be fed? Do you think they'll get to McDonald's?
I think they'll all be basking in the joy of democracy, having produced a positive result.
Yeah, I think so too. So I'm excited. Well, this was absolutely fantastic. Like I said, I can talk to you all day, Bradford Kane. I hope that people pick up Pitchfork Populism and read it. It is a great read. It's very informative. It lays out the 10 steps, like you said, the 10 political forces, and gives you ideas. So it's not just about what was, but what could be. So it really, you lay out a great roadmap for American people and for anyone who wants to, be a responsible, civic-minded person. And I really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
I greatly enjoyed the conversation again, Jeanette, and I thank you very much.
Absolutely. Hope we'll do it again. Let's see what else is coming from this Biden-Harris administration, and obviously this impeachment, the second impeachment trial that is going on. So we'll see what happens. These are very interesting times in our country, but we're here for it. So
Absolutely.
we're all working towards a common goal. It seems like finally. But anyways, thank you again. And thank you guys for joining me, Jeanette Lenoir, for another conversation about culture and politics. And I really appreciate it. I'm Jeanette Lenoir with E Pluribus America. And thank you so much. We'll see you next time.